Welcome to The Writer's Dream. Our show is a show about authors where they can talk about their books, they can talk about their journey through writing, through publishing, and through marketing. It's also a show for people who really like to see how a story becomes a book. Many of the authors who write best-selling books and not so best-selling books are not professional writers, but they have a wonderful idea and a dream, and they turn them into books. And we like to talk about that here, not only the writing process, but the ins and outs of publishing and marketing. Today's guest is Deb Damone, and Deb Damone is a certified family coach. She is the founder of Jewel for the Soul, which is a service of life coaching. Correct. And she is also the author of 2 books, Ominous Betrayal and An Awesome Journey. Correct. And oftentimes what we are finding in society today is that in the old days we didn't air our dirty laundry in public, but now we do. And the upside of that is that there are a lot of self-help tools out there. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. So, Deb, tell us about your books. Tell us about your journey.
Well, that's exactly what it is, Linda. It's a journey. I had never thought or intended for my story to really go public. However, even as a 9-year-old, I used to love to write poetry, and then instead in school when we were supposed to write book reports on authors, I'd make up the author, I'd make up the story. I hated to read. And so...
It's all right, I hated to write.
There you go. And so, I just thought that at times I needed to kind of let go of some of the information. It took me 14 years. And then I thought that maybe I would be able to help people. My mother passed away. And within 2 months, I had it to the publisher. I cleaned it up and got it edited, got it to the publisher, and got the book out and felt that it was really important to me.
So this is her story?
This is my story.
Okay.
This is my story from, I take you back into the 1950s, the early 1950s, and I share some nostalgia about the milkmen and, things that people from that time will really enjoy. And I share some very, very intimate yet clinical. I do it clinically because my story is a very bizarre and sensationalized story in itself. The material is bizarre, and I realized that. So when I was writing it, I wanted it to be palatable for the reader, and so I tried to keep it very clinical. And it shares the story of rape at a very young age. I was only 3, and basically to triumph.
This is your father?
No, actually, it was my mother's side. And unfortunately, my mother got involved with very evil stuff. And it was a power thing, that these people would do these things for power. And so I was being groomed to be a high priestess. And at 3 years old, she basically handed me over to my aunt and uncle, who ran this coven.
So you were the victim of witches?
Correct.
Ooh.
Yes, it was very, very. It was very hard for me to come to grips with because I had buried it so deep. It was buried for 38 years, and I ended up going to a hospital, and for physical issues, I was taken to a hospital. And I was in CCU for 9 days, and then when I got out, basically, it became apparent that it was something that was really brewing emotionally.
Now, at what age was this?
I was 38 years old.
Okay. And so how long were you with this aunt and uncle in this coven?
Well, there was brief moments in my life from when I was 3.5. That's when the introduction to it began. Mm-hmm. And my mother had custody of us with my father, of course, until I was about 5. And so the different times when I was with my aunt and uncle were the the moments that they had to do this. But we don't know how many times I was actually exposed to it. We just know that there's different incidents that happened, and I was very, very young. And we from the accounts and from my memory, it's phenomenal, the things that my mind stored and then released. But by the time I was 9, I think that was the last time that they really had a grip on me.
And did you have like a normal school life? Did you go to school?
Yeah. These were things that they did. My aunt and uncle were, they were superintendents in a building, and most superintendents that were in this thing had the access to basements, and so it was a kind of weekend thing, I guess. My abuse started on Halloween of 1956, and so, you know, it was not something that was every weekend with me, because my father was a key player, and although my father was not really the best parent, had he have known that this had taken place, I think he probably would have been in jail. He definitely would have not stood for this. No.
So how did your mother and her, I guess her brother and...
Her sister and her, yeah, actually it was my mother, her sister, her older sister, her brother-in-law, and my, and then her younger brother was actually one of the perpetrators who had raped me.
So then how do they keep this quiet? I always am very curious about how people can do these evil things, because there are other, you know, cults and various places where children are abused this way, and I always am very fascinated to find out how this is kept undercover.
Well, you have to understand, first of all, children are very compliant. That's number one. And this was very, very... for that time, it was very high tech, and they used drugs, and you know, so I was fed drugs, food laced with whatever drugs that rendered me unconscious. And when I woke up, I was, you know, I was being raped, and I can remember, you know, that feeling of I can't breathe. That's all I could think of. I didn't know or couldn't comprehend anything else that was happening. All I knew was that I was being suffocated from the weight. And so part of it is making sure that the child never talks, and the child is terrified, you know.
Fear, so they use fear.
Absolutely. And, you know, in my case, it was done with, because the drugs were so potent and powerful, a lot of it was very easy for me to forget. I just, you know, part of me would, like I would go to the ceiling, and it caused me to have multiple personality disorder.
So you sort of put it in a different plane. This was something that was happening basically to another
someone
person
else
who kind of communicated with you in your brain somehow.
Well, what happens is you disconnect and you decompartmentalize. And so for each incident, different parts of me would take over. And that's really how I survived. So
with multiple personality disorder, that was your survival mechanism?
That was it, yes.
So did anything ever happen to them? Were they ever arrested, charged?
Well, it's interesting because after I had remembered the abuse, I did a lot of investigating because I could not believe myself, you know, because I had a very good memory, but this was gone. This was wiped out. And so now at 38 years old, I'm remembering this information that makes no sense to me. And yet I could remember directions and places. So my husband would take me to the places that I would say, you know, I remember hearing this, I remember going here. And we would go to see if these places existed, and they did. And so as I was investigating, I was watching, it was something like this on a cable network, I think. And they were discussing David Berkowitz, son of Sam. And I was just interested because I had heard that he had become a Christian, and I'm a Christian. And so I was interested to hear, you know, what his story was. And so as I watched it, I realized that there was a connection between David Berkowitz and myself. And it was terrifying to think that that was even a possibility.
Sure.
And so there were three things that they mentioned. One was that the coven that David had been involved with was from New York City. They moved to Westchester County. And then there was something written on David Berkowitz's wall, and it said something to the effect of, my name is Mr. Williams. I live in this hole, and I will raise my children to be murderers. And I froze, because my uncle was Ray Williams. And so, you know, the reality, they had lived on First Avenue, and they had moved to Westchester. So I was kind of, I could remember that moment, and I thought, I have to, I have to find out. I have to reach him. So he gets thousands and thousands of letters.
David Berkowitz.
Every day, yes. Yeah. And some things get through and some things don't. And so I had a friend who was he was a lot more savvy than I was, and he helped me to reach David Berkowitz. And that letter actually is in the book. And so I wrote to him and I said, I'm trying to put the pieces of my life together. What can you tell me about my aunt and uncle? I know that they had to have had something to do with you. And within days, he wrote me a beautiful letter back. And he said, basically, he wasn't going to give me information, but he basically, at one point, says, there's more I'd like to say, but I can't. He never said I know them. He never said I don't know them. But during the time that this happened, there was, with David Berkowitz being arrested, there was a lot of people dying, a lot of men that were dying in this particular coven. And my uncle was one of them who died. And apparently, I never saw it, but my aunt had been taken to jail, and the cameras were rolling and everything like that. And so they did pay their dues, but not maybe necessarily the way most
you would have
people
liked them to have. Yeah. So then when you realized what had happened to you, how were you inspired to go on with your life and
it was rough.
Change things? It
was rough. In the very beginning, it was very... I went into the deepest, darkest hole I could... I just can't even explain what it was like. Because I've experienced depression, you know, throughout my life. But this was a different place. To think that my mother was part of it, it was devastating. And I thought, how am I going to live through this? And my daughter, we were planning my daughter's wedding at that time. It was supposed to be a wonderful time, and it was just horrible. And I ended up signing myself into a hospital in Washington to get help. That's really where it all came out.
Right.
It evolved because I was in a safe place. But at one point in the hospital, I think I decided, I'm going to fight this, and I'm going to get better. And so 6 weeks after they diagnosed me, they changed the name. It's now dissociative identity disorder. And so they always change the names when I get something.
I know. Yeah, there you go.
But
Is that why they do it?
I think so. But I think it was very... It was just important for me, especially because of my stand in Christianity, to fight this and get better, and then tell the story.
Do you find, because I'm really listening very carefully to this, because you've obviously gone in a direction to help people who have not particularly problems with witchcraft in their childhood, but who have problems with relationships and in fact, it'd be better if you explained what is your life coaching. What is Jewel of the Soul? Jewel of the
Soul is it's an outreach. It's I find that there's a lot of things that are out there for people to get better and to fix themselves. But what I've done is I've coupled it with my understanding of the scriptures. And so, you know, I needed something, because my childhood was so unstable, I needed something that would give stability. And the scriptures are unchanging. And so when I give a precept, a lot of times people have precepts from scripture, they don't even know that they come from the scriptures, you know. So Jewel of the Soul is to help people. A therapist works with your symptoms. I work with your skills. And so, you know, you have to, and you also have to be realistic. If a person is in their 50s and they want to be an astronaut. That's not reality.
No.
However, what they could do is write about the stars, or they could, you know, whatever their interest is, it's learning how to channel it in that direction to give them what they want and what they want to give out.
So basically, people have to identify what it is they want, and then you
And I
help them
help
to
them
get it.
do that, yes.
Yeah, that's very important. I also, one of the things I think, because there are so many stories out there about people who are abused as children, go through really horrible, horrible experiences, and turn, as you do, to helping other people. And the observation I make about that is, and I don't know if it's true in your case, is that this is also a way, because I think to have had a parent do something terrible to you, I think of my own parents and how much I love them. And you know how kids complain about, you wouldn't let me do this,
yeah,
and all that stuff. And my parents were really very good. But to have a parent who does a horrible thing to you, you must have to on a daily basis say, I am a good person, I am a lovable person, I am worthy of love, because your parent didn't love you. And it must be very difficult to get over that. Was that true in your case, that your whole family let them do this to you, and it almost destroyed you? And do you have to work with that?
Of course. Yeah, it's absolutely, it's an issue that you have to deal with. But again, you see, I became a Christian when I was 20. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like he became my father.
Sure.
God became my father. And that can be a rub too, because sometimes you're comparing what you know the earthly father to be like to, you know, the heavenly Father. Mm-hmm. But I had from 20 years old to 38, and I feel like that was like my spiritual muscle, my time to grow spiritually, so that when I did find out, it nearly destroyed me, but it didn't, you know. And
you had pretty much an anchor that you had already established,
yes,
without knowing you needed it.
Yeah.
You knew you needed it, but you didn't know what you needed it for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly. That I couldn't have said that better.
Yeah, well, I think some of us do. We instinctively know that we need something, and sometimes we're really not sure why, and then something happens to us. So this book chronicles that journey from when you first realized what was going on to what, and what's the message of this book?
Well, the message of the book, of all my books, is that no matter what the trial is, there's triumph if you're tenacious.
That's a beautiful message, yeah.
And so this brings you from, you know, the point of view is, of course, from the adult writing it. Mm-hmm. But it takes you back, and sometimes you hear the child speaking. You know, you experience the child walking down the dark corridors, and the fear and what she's feeling and what she's experiencing. And then it takes you, you know, through to the marriage. You know, next month I'll be married 40 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's been difficult for both of us at times.
Sure.
You know, we split up twice in our marriage for, you know, a few months at a time. No marriage is, I don't think, going to be free of problems. You know, there's got to be something in every marriage. But mine, of course, brought its own, you know, table of goods with it. And so for my husband to really live through it and go through it, it was a lot for him too. You know, so I talk about that.
Because he probably had no idea in the beginning to
No,
understand this.
He, you know, and excuse me, and my husband and I, we know each other since we were 5. We were in grade school together, and you know,
That's nice.
So when I remembered, I was in the hospital, and I called him and I said, you know, I've remembered this. I was raped, and he's like, now it makes sense. Well, you know, there was difficulties. There was difficulties in the marriage and trusting and stuff like that, because I didn't worry about him with other women. It was just the trust factor of, you know, do you really love me the way you say you do?
Yeah, well, that's that love thing, because your parents, you know, you really have to think in terms of how important that knowledge that your parents loved you. I mean, I had, my parents spanked Now, of course, today we don't spank. Okay, and I had a therapist ask me once, did you know that your parents loved you? And I said, of course I knew they loved me. They spanked me because they loved me. They wanted me to grow up doing the right thing. I said, maybe it wasn't the best strategy, but it never entered my mind that they didn't love me. But had they allowed one of my father's workmen to, do something terrible to me, I would have really questioned whether they loved me.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because growing up, I had a lot of depression and issues and so on, and everybody would say, what is your problem? What could you have that would be so bad? And I did. Who knew? Who knew? Nobody knew. I didn't know.
Yeah, and I think, and I also think with men in your marriage, men like to fix things, and they can't fix that. You have to fix it, and it's hard for them. That must be very, very frustrating. So, and then you went on to write An Awesome Journey, which is this book.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that one?
Well, An Awesome Journey, basically, although this book was the book that I was writing before my mother died, this one takes you from the point of her death. And it was very, the people that were supportive all the years as I wrote this book were no longer supportive when I wrote An Awesome Journey. And I was basically virtually on my own. My husband, my children, they just couldn't deal with the things my mother had did. And yet I had forgiven her. That was going to be my next question. I wondered if you had ever, forgiven her. Oh, absolutely. I forgave my mother. I think it was 2 years after I remembered, and I really did forgive her. But I couldn't have contact with her. I couldn't.
Well, I understand.
Yeah, I understand. But when I found out she was terminally ill, I did go to her bedside. I wanted her to go in peace, and I wanted her to know it was okay. Yeah. And so this takes you from there. And then I started an organization for mental health in 2007. And it was called Piper, People Improving Peer Empowering Recovery.
Say it slow. Say it.
It's easier now to say it fast. People Improving Peer Empowering Recovery. And it was a peer organization for mental health. And we helped a lot of people who had really serious mental health issues. We were taken under the wing of Toro Law Center, and we had classroom space. It was great, but we couldn't get the funding to keep it going. I couldn't. So you need a good grant writer. Yeah, well, you know what? To tell you the truth, Linda, in this economy, forget it. Yeah, it doesn't even matter. Right. Because people who have had organizations for 20 years have been defunded, and so. So, what does forgiveness feel like? Oh my gosh, it's so liberating. It is so liberating. Believe it or not, I struggle with my forgiveness for my father more than my mother, and I just think God gave me the grace to forgive her. I really do. My father, he just passed away. I found out last week he passed away a couple of months ago. We were estranged for 20 years. But I think I was able to forgive her more because she did have mental health issues, and she really was very led, whereas my father was he was stubborn, He had good points, they both did. Yes, I read it on your website about his good points and his bad points. Oh, you did read? And what I find interesting that you just said is you wanted her, your mother, to go in peace. Yeah. And what do you mean by that peace? What does that mean to you? Well, I wanted her to know that I truly had forgiven her, and it was okay. I wanted her to know that whatever had transpired, and nothing was said. She didn't even speak when I was there, basically. It was just kind of, She heard you. She knew I was there. Yeah. She smiled, but it was just so that she could pass happy or peaceful. Yes. Well, I think that's very important. And are you free now of the multiphasic, multiple personality disorder? Well, you know what? It took me 12 years, and I integrated over 30 personalities at that time. And I think there's still a couple of kids that are still there. And,
you knew you had to make a change when you had to hire a hall. I often think of that scene in Ghost where Whoopi Goldberg she's a medium and she's just talking to two people, but actually there's like 14 people who are trying to make contact.
Exactly.
And I always think that's just so funny.
It's, you know, I mean, I don't have noise traffic and stuff like
Thank
that.
God.
You know. I'm really rather fortunate. I really am, because I was.
You are.
Even the ones that I have that are still, and I know we do know that there's a couple more left, which we didn't know at the time of integration. Basically, everybody's working together, and I'm done with it. You know, I need to move on with my life. Life is too short. I just hit 59, and I need to make the most of my life.
It's a good age, 59.
It's a scary age.
Every age is a good age.
It is, as long as you're here to have it.
Absolutely. My favorite T-shirt is, I got up, I got dressed, I'm here. What more do you want? So, but where are you going now? What's the next thing on the plate?
Well, right now I have 2 more books that are coming out this summer. I did 2 more. I did a book with the anthology for entrepreneurs, and I think there's 15 of us who did that. That's for the unstoppable entrepreneur. And then I did something with life coaching. There's 30 of us who put our expertise into a book, and my book is basically putting the positive side of your business, you know, in motion, how to do it. And I think I'd like to I really think that I'm going to make my career out of writing now.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
co-writing and the life coaching.
Well, it sounds all good to me, and it's always inspiring to hear a story about somebody who's had really something very terrible happen to them, and that the human spirit is able to overcome, and your story is important for other people. So I'm really glad you came.
Thank you. I am too, Linda.
It was nice to meet you.
You too.
And all the best to you, and congratulations on 40 years of marriage.
Thank you.
How many grandchildren?
6.
Oh, very
6
nice.
teenagers.
Very nice. 6 teenagers.
No, they're good.